welcome to the Peleneros Taylor Show, Peleneros Taylor Unplugged, on this Tuesday morning from a place somewhere in southern Sweden. We'll be traveling around doing stories at the same time. While we're on the move, we report the latest developments in the US, Europe, and worldwide on what's going on in the world. We've got 4 stories I wanted to draw your attention to today: Israel, Russia, and the storm shadows there, and the Dog Gate, Haiti Gate, where in Springfield, Ohio, which has taken an interesting turn. Trump used his fantastic intuition, in my view, to highlight something through something that's very visceral for most people, their dogs and pets. And it's he may or may not have been correct about the dog eating. There was some dog eating, but not enough to perhaps justify a grand claim about it. But it certainly highlighted the use and abuse of Haitians in these Midwestern cities, which have seen their demographics transformed, as Europe has been transformed demographically. We'll talk about that. And finally, we'll talk about the latest Ruth, the second Trump assassination man, who is, according to Jesse Waters at Fox News, got a lot of things which point, in my view, to perhaps a planned assassination with several members of the plot. He was not a lone gunman. We just have to make sure that he isn't suicided, as Lee Harvey Oswald was and as Epstein was. So the first thing is that is Israel. Israel's continuing to pound southern Lebanon. On Monday, Lebanon's health ministry said that at least 82 people were killed and 1,645 people wounded, the deadliest day of the Israel-Hezbollah conflict since 2006. Rockets fired by Hezbollah overnight to northern Israel were either destroyed or fell in open areas, the IDF says. Israel said it's broadening its strikes against Hezbollah citizens, and Lebanon received phone messages earlier this week warning them to leave places used by the Iran-backed group. It's such a tragedy this is going on in Lebanon. I remember when I was a child, Lebanon was a synonym for civil war and destruction, and Beirut was a city patrolled by militias, and you had to cross the Green Line, and it's like Belfast or Berlin or something, but incredibly more violent. And there are regular hostage takings of Westerners who travel to Beirut, and the idea that it was some kind of the Paris of the East, as old fading tourist brochures made it out to be, was something of a joke. And then I guess that image lingers on, but in the past 10 or 15 years it has restored some of its glamour as the Arab world's most sophisticated city. Perhaps it's fleshpot, a haven for spies, entrepreneurs, and the Lebanese have re-entered the world with their reputation for good cuisine, good living, some French manners, and entrepreneurialism. The old Phoenicians, of course, were based in Lebanon, or what is today Lebanon. Well, it must be nightmares of an older time when these strikes are hitting out. And does it mean that Israel is going to attack Lebanon? There's much talk of a wider war, a regional escalation. And the BBC reports that people were still trying to reach Beirut. We met families who were carrying only a few bags with some belongings. Many stopped on the main road to Beirut, waiting to be taken to temporary shelters. The widespread Israeli airstrikes, which hit areas in the south, east, and for the first time north of the country, resulted in the deadliest day in Lebanon since at least 2006. Thousands of people have been displaced, according to the government. So I think there's, since everybody is talking up the possibility of regional war, I'm going to present the slightly contrarian view. It comes to us through Simplicius, who's a fantastic analyst on Substack. Substack is the go-to place for good journalism. He thinks that, it's partly as a kind of Ponzi scheme, genocide Ponzi scheme, that is, you attack another country when your first attack isn't going well, just to keep up the war, basically, for Netanyahu's sake, so to avoid perhaps ending up in jail, or worse, if he loses power to his opponents and rivals. And that's always a danger, I think, when you have mad leaders. They'll keep the war going rather than make peace and have elections, and the result of which will lead to their defenestration and possible criminal charges. Criminal charges made worse by their very act of carrying out wars. People tend not to frame it in those ways if their leaders are part of the West, Zelensky or Netanyahu, but history will not be kind to him, I don't think. So what he argues is that the Israeli media is showing its true face now by painting up the Hezbollah as the equal to Hamas in its wickedness. So basically, the war against the Lebanese is like the war against the terrorist shielding Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, and therefore it's justified out of self-defense. Will Hezbollah strike back? Well, they've got some very advanced missiles. They're still licking their wounds. Is it because they can't strike back or won't strike back? Under the can't strike back argument, these exploding pages, which wounded thousands of people and killed dozens, apparently explosives were fed into a batch of pagers being sent into Lebanon earlier this year by Mossad, and they were primed to explode by ringtones, and a lot of damage was done to people's eyes. Apparently the Iranian envoy to Hezbollah lost one eye and severely damaged another when he responded to the beep and then held it up to his eyes, and then that beep was actually the trigger for the explosion. So that was a Mossad operation. The Israelis, of course, are the masters of imaginative, creative, evil operations of that kind, as we saw in that Ronan Bergman book, which I can't recommend enough. A couple of years ago, he wrote Rise Up and Kill. Apparently it's a line from the Bible or the Talmud or something. And where the most Catholic and sort of broad variety of assassination methods had been designed over the years to end the lives prematurely of people fighting for the Palestinian cause. One was this poisoned toothpaste that killed its users very slowly over the course of a month, and Yasser Arafat is alleged to have been poisoned. He's the head of the PLO. Anyway, so this may have the explosion of the pages may have taken out some senior figures, as well as stopped a means of communicating among the Hezbollah, who otherwise regarded as being much more effective and well trained than the Hamas, who are to Israel's south and protecting the Gaza Strip, whereas Hezbollah is to the north. Just to keep it simple there. Hezbollah, on the other hand, it could be that Hezbollah, which allegedly has some very advanced missiles from Iran, which could strike Israel very hard, has refrained from doing things precisely because the fears of nuclear escalation leading to nuclear war, all-out war. So they're being the responsible ones. Perhaps Iran is leading on them, or perhaps Iran won't go into the war, so that prevents Hezbollah from striking out. But behind Iran is Russia. Interestingly, my friend who's been on the Pellegrino Taylor main show, Brandon Wycott's written a couple of books on Iran, thinks that the Russians are pulling hard against Iran, and that might have been one of their points of leverage against the Americans, so far refusing to allow the British to fire their missiles into Russia with impunity. The Brits, who are the main hawks on Ukraine and who have adopted Ukraine as their cause, the entire British establishment is on side with that, and the propaganda is practically incessant on Zelensky's Churchill-like qualities and the righteousness of his cause. The Brits have so far not been given that permission, and it's up for talks this week. But if the Brits, who have far fewer assets around the world than the Americans with their aircraft carriers and 800 bases, whatever it is, have less at stake. If the Americans said yes, well, Putin said, I think on the 13th of September, that ill-fated Friday morning, that it would mean war between the West and Ukraine. Now the Russians have dialed down their rhetoric considerably, but if that still stands, then the US, UK, and Russia will be technically at war, which will allow the Russians to confiscate, British diplomatic compounds, nationalize the assets of BP or whatever. But it also allowed them to strike at British assets abroad, but American assets, or directly or indirectly. So we might have the Houthis, who are undefeated in Yemen, these kind of ragtag rebels, as it were, who are able to control the choke point of the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. Well, that might be issued with those very advanced missiles, which they're so far refrained from firing, more or less, and target American aircraft carriers, and there'll be plausible deniability for the Russians, in that it's one step removed. It's the Houthis doing it. So it's all a delicate game of threat and counter threat, where things are not realized until the moment war breaks out, and then it all comes crashing down, which is a worrying thing. But the Americans might be doing that because the Russians are holding the Iranians, and they're not supplying those advanced weapons to the Houthis, which could take out several aircraft carriers in one fell swoop. So if the Americans say no, that could be one of their reasons. And as long as Russia's holding on to Iran, Iran might be cautious because they're playing the long game. It's interesting, Israel's lasted 70 years, but is Iran, in those quizzes that people ask on street corners, and turn up on TikTok, Iran is one of the oldest countries out there, and so they know how to play the long game, and they are partnered with other countries that know how to play the long game, like China, civilization of 5,000 years, and Russia's not so old, but they might choose to swallow their pride and know that Israel is slowly being cratered economically and socially and politically and touristically. Thousands of people have been evacuated from northern Israel. And to the south, tourism isn't coming to Israel. There's periodic seizings of flights to Tel Aviv, and of course the reputation of Israel, both as a country and as a tourist destination. I mean, people don't want to any more than they wanted to buy South African oranges in the 1980s. They don't want to go and spend their hard-earned tourist dollars on genocidists. And they're just fearful of their lives, so that's cratering Israel. Investment might be cratering. And generally, there's crisis and discord in the Israeli community, a lot of anxiety, a lot of dislike for Netanyahu, a lot of protests there. So there might be just wait and let Israel stew. The Israeli economy is also going down slowly. And of course, we've got the United Nations events this week where the Israelis will be sort of persona non grata, and America will be deploying its diplomatic assets to try and limit criticism of Israel as much as possible. I mean, Israel has become, a lightning rod for the third world, or what used to be called the third world, the global south. Their hatred, resentment, dislike, some of it, a lot of it justified, against the West. At the General Assembly, though, you could expect a lot of speeches against Israel, the very last or latest phase of Western imperialism. Anyway, that's the Israel and Middle East conflict. Welcome back to the Pellet Nerolth Taylor Show. Well, the second story I wanted to focus on was the latest developments in the Trump second assassination case. Ryan Roth has been arrested and is sitting in custody in Florida. But according to Jesse Watters of Fox News, his car contained 6 cell phones and 2 license plates, and the gun had scratched off serial number and a bullet in the chamber. So Trump was quite close to assassination, and that level of preparation in terms of 6 cell phones. In fact, also Jesse Watters says that his sources said that Roth had been staking out Trump for weeks at Mar-a-Lago. Well, it does beg questions, here, where did he get his money from for staking out a man? Where did he get his money from to fly? Why did he have 6 cell phones? He had no money to pay child support for his child, but he lived in a relatively pricey house in Hawaii and afforded flights to Taiwan, Turkey, Poland, and Ukraine, as well as, of course, Palm Beach. He was in Ukraine in 2022 recruiting, and he had a very active Twitter account. His first follower, the person he first followed, was somebody, an ex-CIA official with a Korean name, and connected to the Rand Institute and the SAISS, which is a kind of military-industrial complex think tank. So his tweets had a kind of robotic repetitiveness in its support for Ukraine, almost as if they'd been written by AI or written by some kind of deranged amounts of pro-Ukrainian energy. He was never served a day in jail, despite having 100 different counts to his name. And his fiancée, who just lost her job at Victoria's Secret, was apparently okay with him flying to Ukraine for months at a time. How is he able to feed himself in Ukraine when he only had $68 in his bank account. And everywhere he went, he managed to get coverage from local papers to the New York Times to Newsweek. So people have been digging out, little interviews with Roth from way back as an American in Ukraine supporting Ukraine. And he turned up at that Ukraine Azov Battalion video. I think there's a demonstration being held in Kiev on Sunday. And there he was, the mysterious American with his pink and yellow haircut in the colors of the Ukrainian flag. People talked about MK Ultra, people from the bottom of society being recruited and brainwashed. That's a possibility. Again, there's also the possibility that he was a loner who was just inspired by the mainstream media's demonization of Trump, and so the guilt lies at that level rather than a direct guilt of commission by the FBI. But I have to say that level of preparation of having 6 cell phones and money from strange, unaccounted for sources, even though he's an unemployed roofer or something, construction guy, does beg questions. I'm less inclined to think that it was a lone shooter just inspired by the general hate pumped out by the mainstream media, and more inclined to think maybe this was some kind of operation. Well, I mean, the fortunate thing, of course, is that the man's still alive, and although Epstein died after his CCTV camera went off, in just those moments when he apparently suicided himself, or committed suicide. Sorry, it's not beyond the bounds of possibility this will happen again. But I think what's happened is that there's the first time people are a bit shell shocked, and then the crook's death made a lot of things impossible. His body was incinerated almost immediately, and the crime scene washed down. I mean, you couldn't make this stuff up. But with Roth, people, the Republicans seem a tad more prepared. Now, obviously, the question is, why is there a specific motive to wanting to assassinate Trump rather than more than just clearing out a rival? I would have said, I have this hypothesis that, there's a race against time between the ones who want to start World War III and are prepared to do anything to stop a prevention of that march to World War III, which Trump would represent, because his vice presidential candidate just last week, I think, presented a peace plan which went quite far in going along with what Putin wanted in terms of neutral Ukraine and a demilitarized Ukraine. And Trump represents that very great isolationist strand in American politics, which is against empire. And again, I've talked about that endlessly on my show. But one theory is that Trump had to be taken out because he represented peace, and that the Biden administration didn't want either a rival who likely to win the election or somebody who would dismiss and overcome their Project Ukraine. But I have to say, I'm not sure, because someone who is so in such a thirst for power and so deranged as to want to assassinate a presidential rival in the world's greatest democracy is at least sane enough not to want to escalate to World War III, and is holding off the Brits on that score. So I'm not saying that it's not happening. There might be different levels of command at the Biden administration, different people making the orders, different people who are pushing for peace. It's the Pentagon pushing for peace, and they might completely not be on board a Trump assassination attempt. I know that military men in general tend to vote Republican, I think. So that's that. And the Roth revelations are adding fire to the Republican base, of course. But as far as I can see, the mainstream media in the UK and America, the Trump assassination is yesterday's story, and they're on to something else. But so it is.